Park Triumphed.
Lighting design, thank you. A round of applause.
Of course. All right. So we're here going to talk about lighting control. Here's the AIA statement. You guys have probably seen this a number of times today. All right. Here are some things we're going to be able to do at the end of this. So I want to encourage you to ask questions as we go along. It will make it a lot more interesting for everyone, and it will also enable us all to stay awake because, as we're going to talk about it in a few minutes, we're going to very quickly approach the 3 o'clock carbs and caffeine zone. So ask away. All right. When we're talking about control, it's important to sort of just talk about what we mean. So we can be talking about a very carefully crafted visual environment. We can talk about lighting that is used to enhance wayfinding or placemaking. We can talk about adjusting the intensity of, or in some cases, the color of luminaires from different manufacturers so that they work together in a seamless whole. Control can be about code compliance. And it can be about having luminaires respond to exterior stimuli to keep us entrained in our circadian system. And control can also be about the integration of, ooh, I skipped one. Nope, I just got myself a little bit confused. It can be about, control can also be about the interaction of luminaires and HVAC equipment, right? Turning things on and off in response to occupancy sensors, and also about integrating AV or other systems within the built environment. So all of these things fall under the rubric of lighting control, and we're going to talk a little bit about how that happens now. So previously, in the old days, I like to say in the year 3 when dinosaurs roamed the earth, the way that control systems were set up was really very straightforward. There was, oh no, no laser. No laser and no AV guy. All right, well, I'll just point and you guys will pretend that there's a laser here. All right, so there used to be, bummer. I really like that little laser guy. All right, so there used to, in the old days, we had a hardwire connection, right? A physical piece of wire that ran from, I'm going to try this again because I just never learn. Nope, absolutely not. Okay, so this is our control device, this switch. This is our light bulb, our load, and there's actually a physical piece of wire in this diagram that's running from the load to the control device. And during that time, well, which really, we're talking about like, 10, 15 years ago. We're not talking about that long ago. When we established control groups or channels or zones, the way we did that was through these hardwire connections. Any 2 fixtures that were wired on the same circuit always worked together. They were twinned, right? So this approach yielded many very attractive installations. Today, we have slightly different ways of doing it, but one of the things that's important to note is that many of our existing protocols, this is a wiring diagram for 2 different versions of a 0 to 10 volt control protocol, actually are based on those older models. And the way that we know that is because we've actually labeled, again, pretend I'm pointing with a laser, we've actually labeled the colors of the wires that are coming into the driver and then going out to the LED. So even though it's an LED and a driver, which are 2 very highly sophisticated pieces of electronic equipment, we're still talking about wire that's physically running from one point to the other. Now, current control systems, or systems that are based on current technology, tend to be a little bit less wire intensive and a little bit more communications intensive. This one on the left, is a DALI system. So a DALI system, DALI stands for Digital Addressable Lighting Interface, and those systems run on what's called a DALI bus, which is basically just a line that that connects all of the pieces of equipment. And you can see here that all of these things are sort of, they're connected to each other, but they're connected via a communications loop as opposed to a hard wire that's carrying actual voltage. So you can see that in the stack here, we have cove lights. Actually, you probably can't see because it's a very blurry slide. downlights, more downlights, and here is electrochromic glass. Over here, we have an occupancy sensor. Here's a key station, a 5-button station. Here are blackout shades. And here is, the system manager, right? So it's still connected, but it's connected via a communications protocol. And then over here, on the right-hand side, what you're seeing is a very, very basic diagram of a wireless system, which is communicating through some sort of radio frequency. That could be via one of the manufacturers that's downstairs. It could be, there are lots of different ways that you can do it. It can be a Bluetooth mesh. It can be radio frequency. It can be all kinds of things. All right, but we still have the same pieces of equipment. And we have had these same pieces of equipment for a very long time. We have sensors, we have switches, and we have lighting fixtures. Okay? So one thing I do want to point out, if you haven't walked the show floor yet, and I think actually I've seen most of you walking the show floor, those fixtures right there are right next to the art installation. They are very, very cool. The guy who's there, his name is Ben. You should tell him that Shauna said to say hi. He's a really, what they're doing with with that particular manufacturer is really, really interesting, and it's definitely worth stopping to take a look at. Which is not to say that all of the other manufacturers on the show floor are not also interesting, but these are really cool. Okay. Many of the most basic types of control that we have are based on sensors. And sensors can be either integrated into a fixture. Here's a picture of one that's integrated into a fixture. Or they can be surface mounted, or they can be mounted to walls. There's all kinds of different ways that we can integrate sensors into our environment in order to make things work. And we're going to look at those in a minute, too. All right. Basically, there are two different kinds of things that we do with sensors that are important. One is occupancy and vacancy. And for occupancy and vacancy, we have two kinds of sensors. We have passive infrared, or PIR, and we have radio frequency, or ultrasonic. Okay? They both basically operate along the same principle, which is that I put something out, and something comes back, and the difference between what I put out and what comes back tells me that there's something going on. In the case of the passive infrared, it has to do with whether or not something is standing between, like is blocking the infrared beam of light from getting out all the way out and bouncing back. Does that make sense? And in the case of a radio frequency or ultrasonic sensor, what we're talking about is essentially sonar, right? It sends out a sound wave that we can't hear. I suppose dogs probably can hear it, which makes that slide kind of funny. Anyway, so it sends out an ultrasonic pulse, and depending on how it comes back, it learns the environment, right? It can say, for example, oh, the pulse that I'm sending out in this direction is hitting that column, and so it's coming back in a different way, at a different trajectory than the pulse that's hitting that wall, and so the sensor can actually learn that that column is there standing in the way, and that becomes important. Why does that become important? Imagine being stuck in a restroom when the lights go off, right? So a passive infrared sensor cannot read, for example, the partition that separates the stalls, but an ultrasonic sensor can, right? An ultrasonic sensor will learn that there are these partitions and there's this solid wall, and then it will also learn when your feet are on the floor, okay? So there's also another way to fix that from a lighting design standpoint, which I'm going to tell you about in a minute. But that's the reason when you have complicated architecture in your space, and by complicated I mean any architecture that's not an open plan office, when you have pillars, when you have large beams, when you have strange offices that have cropped up because somebody decided that this little path of open space now needs to be not open space. When you have any sort of complicated architecture, you always want to use what's called a dual technology sensor so that you are reading, so that you have as much of a chance as possible to get as much information from the room as you possibly can. And that will make your sensors behave in a more sophisticated manner. Okay. So we primarily use sensors for occupancy and vacancy. And the reason that we do that is because they mostly meet code. Right? So the simplest way to meet most energy use codes is by the use of an occupancy or vacancy sensor. And they also supplement other functions like time clocks. Okay? Either approach typically will meet code, although most codes favor vacancy over occupancy. Okay? So here's the difference. All right, an occupancy sensor, and I believe that the stack here is a little bit misaligned, so I'm gonna go through all the cute little animation, and then I'll explain to you how it really works. All right, yeah. So first of all, an occupancy sensor comes on automatically, and vacancy requires initiation. We'll talk about that in a minute. Occupancy, I told you it was a little bit off here. So I'm just gonna do this. Okay, now it's all lined up. It's really not lined up properly, just pretend, okay? Bear with me. All right, occupancy sensors are auto on and timed off. Vacancy sensors require initiation and are timed off. So just pretend that timed off is the second bullet point there. Occupancy sensors do not require an interface of any sort or a switch. Vacancy sensors do require an interface or a switch, okay? Occupancy sensors have a problem with interference from surrounding activity, and vacancy sensors do not. So what do I mean by interference? I mean, whoa! I mean, I hit the button too soon. Okay, sorry about that. I mean that the people passing outside this glass window could set off an occupancy sensor, right? So anytime somebody complains to you that every time somebody walks past my door, the lights turn off or the lights turn on, that's an adjacency effect from an occupancy sensor that's not properly shielded or not properly set up. Why do codes prefer vacancy over occupancy? Because vacancy requires initiation. So you actually save between 3 and 5% more energy because you have to do something to turn a vacancy-controlled room on. The best way to think about it is you go to a meeting, you leave your office to go to a meeting, and you suddenly realize that you forgot your phone, and you jump back in the room to get your phone. You don't need to turn the lights on for that. Right? You know where your phone is. Your phone sits in the same spot on the corner of your desk all day, every day. You know exactly where it is. If it was pitch black, you could reach in and grab your phone. That's a vacancy sensing application. So you walk in, nothing happens, except the potential exists for you to be able to turn the lights on. In occupancy, if you bounced in, oh, are you coming to switch out remotes with me? Thank you. Laser. Thank you. This one says no laser. Okay, but I want you guys to see that it says no laser on it.
Is that occupancy or vacancy?
I'm so excited, though, because this little green dot really does make me a little happy, and it means that when I wave my hands around, at least you know what I'm pointing at. Okay. I think we've beaten the occupancy-vacancy horse to death here, so let's talk about daylight harvesting, which also uses sensors. Why do we use it? Okay. It's code required in many municipalities and other jurisdictions, and it's based on the amount of window or other glazing and the area that is exposed to that window or other glazing. And by other glazing, I mean like a skylight or a monitor, something like that, or a window. And in general, it's about 600 square feet. So generally, any space that's 600 square feet and uses it's either 100 or 150 watts of energy must be controlled by some sort of daylight responsive control. And the way that we do that is with a daylight sensor. Daylight harvesting establishes daylight control zones, which we're going to look at. And the whole premise is that we're balancing the free daylight against the paid-for electric light. Okay? I just want to make a brief plea to not talk about artificial light. There's no such thing as artificial light. Artificial is for sweeteners. Light is light. It's just the sine wave, it's just the waves, it's all a naturally occurring phenomenon no matter how it's generated. It's just a little pet peeve, lighting designers, we're weird that way. Okay, we have two different kinds of daylight sensors and two different kinds of daylight sensing systems. One is an open loop control in which the daylight sensor is literally just telling you, just reading how much light is coming in through the window. And it's adjusting the intensity of the electric light based on the amount of light coming in through the window. It's not a bad way to go, but it's not as specific as we might like it to be. In my mind, better way is with a closed loop system, and in a closed loop system, the daylight sensor is actually reading, the sensor is actually reading the amount of light on the desk surface, on the work surface. So for me, this is a much more efficient use of both sensing technology and electricity because because what we're doing is we're saying, no matter what you do, make sure I keep 30-foot candles on the desk. That way, the sensor, I mean, it requires a slightly more sophisticated sensor array, but the sensor is then balancing the incident daylight and the electric light to maintain a certain amount of light on the tables so that you don't have any sort of dropout or lag. Does that make sense? Okay. So let's look at this briefly. First of all, I want you all to pretend that instead of seeing 12 1x4s in this plan view, you're actually seeing 3 16-foot runs of a really sexy direct and indirect fixture. It was hard to find a free diagram online, so this is what I got. All right, so remember I said that daylight establishes daylight control zones, and this diagram does in fact give us 3 very interesting and sort of clear daylight control zones. We have the primary side-lit daylight zone, which is the window. We have what's called the secondary zone, and then we have the skylight zone. Okay? Now this skylight zone really complicates matters from the perspective of how we set our sensors. So we're going to leave it alone for a minute, and I'm going to talk about the issues just with the primary and secondary daylight zone, and then we'll go on from there. So in these 3, we actually have 4 zones of lighting, right? Because we have this one fixture. Remember, this is one really cool, sexy direct and indirect fixture. What is it doing most of the time? It's on, right? That was the right answer. It's on. It's on because the office is open. We're just pretending this is an open office. The office is open. There are people in the office. We want the light on. All right, cool. In this secondary zone here, let's, for a brief moment, pretend that this secondary zone continues all the way down. In this secondary zone, what is that fixture doing? It's on some. Right? Maybe it's on at 50%, maybe it's on for a couple hours a day. It's something, it's not at full, it's not 100% all the time, but it's something. And at night, we know it's on, right? And here, these guys, again, let's pretend that this is one zone. What's that doing most of the time? It's off, right? That's the goal of daylight harvesting, is to have the electric lights off for as much of the time as you possibly can. All right, so the first thing we're going to think about is, imagine what this room looks like when you have these 3 fixtures at 3 different levels. So it looks a little bit, right? That was the advanced technical term. It looks a little bit funky, right? You've got the very bright daylight, then you've got this sort of medium electric light, and then you've got the electric light. Now, the good news is that because you've used a closed-loop system, you always have 30-foot candles on the desk. So at least everybody who's in the room is seeing the same amount of light in terms of getting their work done, and they're not complaining. But it does look a little funky. So one thing that you might want to do is you might want to take your indirect illumination, your uplight, and maybe set it for a low level that can be maintained by the daylight sensors so that your ceiling is a consistent brightness. From a lighting design standpoint, why would that be preferable to having a dark stripe, a medium stripe, and a bright stripe? What? It would look nicer, yes, it absolutely would look nicer, and we call that looking nicer thing surface contrast, right? We want to manage the amount of contrast that we see in the various surfaces in our 6-sided cube. Everybody following along with that? All right. Now, I'm really going to throw like a huge wrench into this whole thing. What do you think happens to the back half of these 2 fixtures when there's no clouds in the sky and there's light coming in through the daylight, or through the skylight? They're off. So this is the issue with daylight harvesting, and this is why it's important to think about where you place your fixtures and their relationship to the windows, and also to the skylight in this case, when you are setting out to use daylighting. Because how weird is this going to look when half of the fixture is on and half of the fixture is off? It's mostly going to look like a mistake, right? So I might say, were this a design class, a lighting design class or a lighting design clinic as opposed to a talk about lighting control, I might suggest that putting a direct indirect pendant that is somehow connected physically to direct indirect pendants in a different daylight zone is not the best option if this were a lighting design class. Since this is a control class, I'm simply going to remind everybody that we actually have 3 zones that need to be controlled independently, and that needs to be accounted for in the control intent narrative, which we're going to talk about much later. Everybody following along? All right, good. All right, so here are some other things that we need to think about in control. Remember I talked about 3 o'clock carbs and coffee? All right. We all know this. This is all information, I believe, that is pretty readily available at this point, which is that the color temperature of daylight changes throughout the day. It's warmer at the very beginning of the day, and then it gets nice and cool and bright. And then as we start leaving noon and start heading into the evening, it gets really warm again, right? We know that exposure to light in the wrong side of the spectrum from where we are during our day can really mess with our sleep patterns. And we know that effect can actually take like a week to fully leave our bodies, okay? We also know that our eyes are the primary way, well, we know that the eyes are our primary way of taking in information because we tend to be visual human beings, visual animals. But the other thing that's important to know is that we have this 4th photoreceptor, right? We have this intrinsically photosensitive ganglion. I always mess it up. Do you guys know what I'm talking about, right? Okay, and not only does the IPRGC, right? Not only does the IPRGC respond to the color temperature of the light that hits it, it also takes in information from the rods and cones, and it is the primary way that visual information is transmitted along the visual cortex into your brain. So the really, really super cool science nerdy thing here is that the one photoreceptor that doesn't have anything to do with vision is actually responsible for taking visual information and translating it to your brain. So what do we know about that? Why is that important? It means that we don't want to mess with it, right? And this front half of the room, you guys are all still young enough so that it doesn't really matter. But everybody back here, and I sit back here too, I'm telling you, and you guys want to know this because you're designing for the rest of us, I'm telling you, it's important. Because once you get to the point where your sleep is easily disrupted, those of us who were in fact around in the year 3 when dinosaurs walked the earth, once you get to that point where your sleep is easily disrupted, it is so hard to get it back on. And somebody in this room tell me I'm lying. No. It is so hard. For you guys, you're like, yeah, what the heck? What is she talking about? I promise you, just trust me. Stick that away in your brain, and someday you'll need that piece of information. So that's why circadian lighting matters. Circadian lighting matters because it's really important to keep people entrained. There's a very, very, very famous study that was done at the Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston about nurses who worked, nurses work these really weird shifts, right? They work 11 to 3 or 3 to 11, 11 to 7, right? 11 to 7. So the nurses who worked the 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift had a higher incidence of mood disorders and breast cancer than the nurses who worked the 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. shift. They followed these women for like 25 years or something. It's a really, really famous study. If you just search like Brigham and Women's breast cancer study, it should come up. And it was actually one of the things that I believe was part of the foundational science that led them to discover this intrinsically photoreceptive the ganglion cell, right? They couldn't figure out, and then they did it again with shift workers, with people who worked on the 3rd shift like in Detroit before they went on strike last week. So what they found was that people who worked at like off had a higher incidence of breast cancer and mood disorders than people who worked on. So it's really, really, really important. That's my little pitch. Yes, ma'am.
I have fun just to add to that. They also did a study, I did a little bit of dissertation on this a couple years ago, where if you burn yourself during the day, you burn yourself at night, because you're in the light cycle of your body, the burn at night will take 9 days longer to heal, even though identical.
Oh,
So don't injure yourself at night.
interesting. She was saying they did a study in which people will, presumably they didn't voluntarily burn people, but they discovered that people who were injured at night, as opposed to people who were injured during the day, it took longer to heal than people who were injured during the day. And that actually makes a lot of sense, because if you think about it, the cell regeneration process, the things that you do, your body being active to heal, would happen while you're awake. At night is when we're sort of building up energy for that. So it kind of does make a little bit of sense. So, yeah, sure.
My house is older and parts of it are not very light, and as I get older, I like brighter light. I've changed out light bulbs to 5000K in my overhead. I like it. And I use some of my overhead fixtures to 5K. I'm wondering if that would be affecting sleep.
100%.
Being around that.
Without question, anything over 3,500 degrees Kelvin suppresses melatonin production. And that is why all of the municipalities that first dove in and put in LED streetlights at 4,000K are now going back and redoing them. It's 3,500K is the absolute max. You want to be, and in fact, I'm going to show you a picture. Look at that. There's the picture. That's what you want your house to look like at night. That middle picture, or that third picture. So, well, you can have a lot of light. It can be bright. It just warm. Now, the folks who work at the Lighting and Health Research Center, who develop all of this stuff, they're like the super smart people. They like to say bright days and dark nights. That's sort of the easy rubric for you to remember. Brighter days, darker nights. So one of the things that the issue is, you can't have it both ways. You can have it bright and cheery at night and you can be up and doing things, but you can't expect to then fall asleep. That's really what it comes down to. And I'm just going to diverge from the whole lighting thing for a second and say, isn't that the lesson of adulthood? You can't have it both ways. Fundamentally, is that not the difference between being a kid and being an adult, is that you finally understand that I can have anything I want, but I'm going to have to pay for it sooner or later on some end? I mean, okay, so you thought you were coming to talk about lighting control and I'm actually giving you life lessons, but I mean, think about it. Is that not really where we are? All right, so this particular fixture, which is not, I am in no way necessarily suggesting that it's a great fixture. I happen to think it's a lousy industrial design. But what is really cool about it is that it comes out of the box with this programmed thing to go through color temperatures across the course of the day so that you don't even have to set it to be warm at night. It just is. So I think that's kind of a cool idea. I happen to think it's an ugly fixture and I wouldn't want it in my house, but that's just me. Okay, and the good news is because I can't tell you the brand, you can't tell the person who designed it that I said that. So let's talk about, just because it's awfully bright. Let's talk about what these things look like really quickly. So we're gonna talk about occupancy versus vacancy. So what I have here are two sensors and I'm gonna show you these first. So I have two little wafer guys. I like to call these multifamily specials. Anybody who's done any work in the multifamily sphere, and I feel you because I do a lot of work in that sphere too, and it really is horrible, has had to deal with these fixtures. For those of you who don't know, I'm going to actually, hopefully this is not going to screw up the control, but I'm going to talk for a minute about the evils of the wafer fixture. Just for a second, I want to say that if you can't afford to, if you are not willing to spend more than $40 or in some cases $25 for a fixture in somebody's living space, perhaps you should be reconsidering why you're building living spaces. Okay, I'm getting off my soapbox now and back onto my educational whatever. Maybe. she said. All right, so once I get this attached again, oh, there it is, okay. Maybe, there we go, okay. So I have one fixture, I have 2 fixtures and 2 sensors in this box. And the good news for all of you is that I am not going to point it at you because these are horrifically bright, which is why we hate them. All right, this side of the box is set up to be occupancy. I'm going to pick up the sensor, and the light's going to come on. Can you guys see that the light is on? Okay, good, because it's blinding me. I can do anything I want with the sensor. The light's going to stay on. Once I put this down, and I'm going to cover it up so that it doesn't blind us all, eventually, if you watch over here, you will see that the light is going to go off. It should go off in about a minute. I don't really remember how we timed it. This other side of the room is set up for vacancy. This is a hallway sensor, but as you can see, I'm waving it around, nothing's happening, right? The only thing that will make something happen is if I turn it on, okay? So in vacancy, you get the potential to turn the fixture on. When I picked this up, it essentially woke the fixture up and said, okay, when you get the signal from the switch, then you can turn on, okay? In occupancy, all you need is the motion in order to initiate the lighting activity. Does that make sense? Okay, so the one thing to know about, well, actually, we're gonna talk about that in a minute. So this fixture, I can also, by the way, turn this horrific fixture off, and then we don't have to look at it anymore, and I can turn this fixture off as well, and that's a control system, right? A sensor, a luminaire, and an override device, or a switch, that's basically a complete little mini control cell, almost. Does that make sense? All right. So that's occupancy. Yes, sir?
So I heard, and I don't know if it's true, that's what I'm asking the expert. There's new in the IEC code that you can't use a battery on a switch anymore?
So they don't, I think what the IECC says, and I'm not a code person, I'm a controls person, but not a code person, although I have several good friends who are code people. I believe what it is that you can only use a battery that has a specific, like, extra long life. And I believe that what the code is actually seeking to do is to make sure that the switches, any of the override devices don't outlive their battery life. The good news is that we now have, like, these wireless devices. This isn't even, I believe this one is actually kinetically powered. So there are many, many, many versions now where the actual simple fact of touching the button is enough of creates enough potential to power the action. So I think that that's what the code is sort of aiming toward, to get us away from the idea of like a hearing aid battery or a AAA battery that would, like, would die, and nothing happens. So it could be. It wouldn't be the strangest thing that I've seen in code. Codes can be weird. And we're going to talk about, I should have mentioned this about codes too. Another life lesson about, that lighting is all about life. Codes, which many of us like to complain about, and I'm one of them, because they create, I think, unrealistic expectations for what can work in terms of the amount of energy we can use, and they're not particularly well suited for designers. That being said, codes are like good parenting. They provide boundaries which give us a sense of freedom and safety as long as we stay within the lines. So that's kind of a way to look at codes that's not, I hate codes. You got to do something. All right. I was going to talk about other types of control. We have other types of control. We can talk about tunable white. So what is tunable white? Oh, I lost my, here. All right. In a tunable white fixture, and I'm going to pass this around so that you can see, what you actually have are diodes of 2 different color temperatures. And in tunable white, what we're doing is we're balancing the colder one and the warmer one to create a color of light that we like. So you guys can pass this around if you like. You can see what the tunable white strip looks like. And in the meantime, I am going to show you what that looks like. So I have two zones of control. I have a warmer zone, and I have a cooler zone, maybe. And you can see that I'm trying to not point this in anybody's eyes. Maybe if I do it this way, it's a little better. You can see that by adjusting the intensity of the warmer version, the warmer zone and the cooler zone, I can get different color temperatures of white. Does that seem reasonably obvious to everyone? Awesome. So this is something that needs to be controlled, and we're going to talk about this in a minute. This is two zones of control, right? This is the warm zone and the cool zone. There's another way. This particular version is powered by a protocol called DMX, which if anybody was downstairs during lunch, Dave Young talked about DMX, and he had the little cowboy on the slides. DMX is a great protocol. It is a type of control, okay? Another way to control dynamic white or tunable white is via a 0 to 10 volt interface. And in this case, we have one slide, one channel that does intensity, and another channel, that does color temperature. Can you guys see that? Right, so we have color temperature on one side and intensity on the other. This is different. Both of these tunable white versions are different than warm dim, okay? So anybody who is specifying, so tunable white and warm dim are two different types of dynamic white. Warm dim looks like this. Oops. Okay. Here we go. Warm dim looks like this. This is the fixture fully on. It's one color temperature. And now, as I dim it, you'll notice it gets significantly warmer. Does everybody see that? So in this case, the intensity of the light is tied to the color temperature of the light. Why would we want this? Yes, exactly. It mimics incandescent. So the answer is because this is what our grandparents had, or in my case, my parents, right? This is what everybody's dining room used to look like. Those of you in the front, in this front corner, have never lived in a dining room that looks like this. But if you go to your grandparents' house, I promise you, this is what it used to look like. So now, let me ask you another question, and this is sort of a trick question. Why is it a difficult thing to incorporate this into a larger project? I'm going to give you a little bit of a hint. Maybe. Hold on. Oops. Why do you think it would be difficult? Let me turn this down now. Now this is way too bright. Okay. Why would it be difficult to integrate a warm dim fixture into a project with other fixtures? Yes, because in a warm dim fixture, somebody else has already determined the color temperature and the intensity match. And in a tunable white situation, you are determining it. Now, the real sort of answer to that is you will never, ever get them to match. That's really the answer. So if you have a warm dim fixture from manufacturer A and a warm dim fixture from manufacturer B, say, for example, your downlights are from one company and your under cabinet fixture is from another company, if they are both warm dim, they will never match, no matter what you do. They can't match because two different people designed the circuitry that follows the dimming curve. And it's subjective. So if you're going to use if you're working on a project that has fixtures from more than one manufacturer, and I'm just going to go out here and say that as a designer, it is always a good idea to play to a manufacturer's strengths. And there are very few manufacturers who do everything, every single positive thing well. then you are much better off with tunable or dynamic white than you are with warm dim, because then you're in control of both the intensity and the color temperature. Does that make sense? Okay. I showed you all the things. All right. So now let's talk about how this can get on a project. All right. This slide is out of order. I apologize. We're going to go forward, and then we're going to go backward. Just bear with me. All right. This is where we should have been. OK. We're going to talk about 3 kinds of documents: the owner's project requirement, or OPR, the control intent narrative, or CIN, and the sequence of operations, or SOO. So here we go. The OPR, the owner's project requirements, this is the owner's brief. This is what the person who's paying the bills thinks you're building. I want to build a high-tech roller rink. I want to build the world's greatest office tower. I want to build a swimming pool that has a glass bottom and can house dolphins. Whatever it is, this is what the owner is telling you they think you're doing, okay? From their point of view, not from yours. The control intent narrative is an overview in English, and we're going to talk about why that's important in a minute, of how the lighting control is going to operate and what it's going to do. It should be both descriptive and also provide a little bit of guidance. Because it should give, it's easy for me to say. It should provide an outline of what the system needs to ultimately do. And the sequence of operations is the contractually enforceable document that actually tells us what the control system is going to do. So we're going to talk a little bit about the owner's project requirements, but since lighting designers don't write that, I can't really tell you anything other than, well, that's not true. I can tell you some things. I can tell you you should always ask for one, that your architect may very well say, what's that? And that if you do get one, it is often cut and pasted from multiple other projects and may include such gems as all fluorescent lamps should be T8 and all lighting equipment should use LED diodes, because it's cut and pasted from a bunch of different stuff. So read it carefully, but know that sometimes it is the best description you will ever get from the owner in terms of what they're building. Also know that if you say to an owner's rep or a project manager, hey, where's the owner's project requirements? Where's the OPR? If you're in CA and they say we're working on it, you've got a problem. It may not be a big problem, but it's a problem. All right. The other thing I want to talk about, the control intent narrative, this thing about the overview in English, here's the deal. My parents are college professors. They're very smart people. They have no idea what I do for a living. None. How many people in this room have parents who understand what they do for a living? Really? Okay, your dad was one. Okay. So how many people not related to architects, interior designers, engineers have parents who understand what they do for a living? Yeah. So when you write a control intent narrative, you want to remember that if your parents don't understand what you do and they love you and want you to succeed, nobody else on the project team is going to understand it either. You want to write this for Aunt Betty or for your mom or for your third grade teacher. The person that you want to say, oh my gosh, you are the most brilliant, add job title here, interior designer, lighting designer, specifier, whatever you want to call it, the person, that's who you're writing for when you write a control intent narrative. The sequence of operations, that's the part that when the contractor bids per plans and specs, that's what they're talking about. The per plans and specs part is the sequence of operations. That does not need to be understandable to anybody other than the contractor, the vendor, the people who are actually going to accomplish this. Okay? And we're going to talk about how that works in a minute. All right, now I'm going to go back for a second. Sorry about this. Oh, I could have just done that. All right. So The owner's project requirements, as I mentioned, is written by the owner's team, sometimes in collaboration with the architect, sometimes not. The control intent narrative is written by the lighting control specifier, who may or may not be the lighting designer on the project. The lighting control specifier may be the distributor. It may be a manufacturer. It may be a rep. It may be a contractor. But the person who is describing the control sequences is the person who is specifying the system, okay? And the sequence of operations should be written together with the electrical engineer, the person who's stamping and sealing those drawings and devising the panels. They should be involved in the creation of the sequence of operations, okay? Sorry, we'll go through this again, blah, 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 sorry. All right, how do we get started? These topics stay the same. Code compliance, space functionality, the luminaire control, the design aesthetics, daylight integration, and systems integrations. All of these things exist in all three of these documents. What is different is how each of the documents addresses them. So the OPR, the owner's project requirements, provide use cases or examples of what the owner wants. I want my room reservation system to also tell my HVAC, my air conditioning, when the room is going to be in use so that I can cool it down in advance or heat it up or leave it alone. That's an interaction that an owner might want. I want my occupancy sensors to tell cars when they're entering the parking garage how many spaces are available on each level. That's also a control dynamic that a system should give you. And all of those sensors come, by and large, from the lighting equipment. That's the thing to remember. It's usually the lighting person who's actually specifying the sensor that's going to give you this other information. So that's why it's important, one of the many reasons it's important to have the OPR, because it tells you what it is that they're looking for, okay? The control intent narrative takes those same topics and says, how is the system going to accomplish this? And then the sequence of operations actually tells you what the nuts and bolts are that are going to make the whole thing happen. Okay, so I like to talk about the control intent narrative primarily because I think if you can provide clear intent, it's much easier for people to give you a system that can do what you tell it to do as long as you're telling them what you want it to do. Okay? All right. So here are some questions. We're going to look at some really basic questions. What spaces or functions? When you start a project and you're trying to figure this out, what spaces are you dealing with? Well, if you're dealing with a commercial office, you've got conference rooms, you've got open office spaces, you've got pantries, you've got restrooms, and you probably also have some sort of a touchdown space. Pretty much, corridors, right? And private offices. All right, so what types of technology? So first of all, we know we're dealing with LEDs as a lighting source because that's basically what we got now. But we're also dealing with room reservation systems, we're dealing with asset tracking sometimes, we're dealing with sophisticated HVAC systems. Those are sort of your technology questions. Also, we could be dealing with digital controls versus wired controls, right? How will people or the environment interact with the system? How am I going to turn the lights on? And how's the daylighting going to happen? How will I know if it's working? It's a good one, right? You can't claim success unless you've provided some means of judging success. And most importantly, on some level, how will someone else know if it's working? And the reason that that's important is because commissioning or enhanced measurement and verification are part of LEED and WELL. And actually, in some cases, part of some code compliance paths too. So that means that you need to have a third party who will then certify that your system is doing what you said it was going to do. So in order for somebody else to know that your system is doing what you said it was going to do, you have to say what it's going to do. And that's what the control intent narrative does. It says what it's going to do. So let's look at some questions. We're going to look at a private office. What happens when people leave their offices? It's a pretty basic question. The lights turn off. It wasn't a trick. What are the controlling variables? How do we know what the lights are going to turn off? Time of day and length of vacancy. What is going on in the rest of the office? Like, is it 9 o'clock in the morning or 9 o'clock at night? And how long has the office been vacant? So now let's look at what these 3 documents are going to say about that particular instance. So first of all, the owner, we're going to see this a lot because that's really what owners want. They want simple local control to meet code because they think that that's cheapest and because they think it's easiest. It may be simplest, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's best, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it will achieve the most. The control intent narrative is going to say, when people leave their offices during occupied hours, the lights should turn off after 2 minutes. That's pretty straightforward, right? What happens when people leave their offices? The lights turn out. What's the controlling variable? It's during the day, and it's 2 minutes. The sequence of operations is going to dig down a little bit deeper. First of all, it's going to say that private offices shall be equipped with ceiling-mounted vacancy sensors. Why ceiling-mounted vacancy sensors? Why? So because, among other things, the ones that are mounted to the switch plates see the world in a fundamentally different way than the one on the ceiling. Think about it. I mean, we can look at our 2 sensors here. Not that they're the perfect example, but still. Here's a ceiling-mounted sensor. There's a light going on, right? I'm gonna take this little case off, maybe. Let's see if I can do that. Well, it came off once. Well, all right, trust me that this little button means that it's seeing 360 degrees, and it's up there, and so it can see the whole room, right? This guy can't because it's mounted on the wall. Now, if you imagine that this is shrunk down to 1/8 of its size and mounted onto a switch plate, it really can't see the whole room. Even if it tells you it can, it's lying, right? So we want to be as specific as we can be in order to make sure that we get the best opportunities for things to work. So ceiling-mounted vacancy sensors tells the person who is putting together our system that we need, A, that we want it mounted on the ceiling, and B, that we want it set to vacancy, not occupancy. The other thing is, it says here, during operational hours, sensors shall operate with a 2-minute time delay. So I want to stop for a minute and talk about these 3 little letters here, ADJ, which stands for adjustable. Why is this important? It's important because this is a contract document. Remember, this is per plans and specs. So if I said 2 minutes and I didn't have that little ADJ at the end, and I decided that instead I wanted an hour, 1.5 minutes, or 2.5 minutes, or 5 minutes later, the contractor could say, well, I bid this, and I allotted time for somebody to program this once. And now you're asking me to program it again. So guess what? Is everybody familiar with the little meme? Original contract, change order, the boats, little boat, original contract, big boat, change order? That's what that is. Okay, so if you include those letters, ADJ, adjustable, you have just saved yourself from the big boat. Why? Because you have said in advance, don't hold me to this, I'm going to come back and look at it again. It's important. And in fact, in my control intent narratives that I write on my projects, I actually have a whole huge line at the beginning before I start talking about function that says, all set points and limits that are described in this document going forward are considered to be preliminary. Don't hold me to it, because I might be wrong. Being wrong is not the problem. Being unable to recover from being wrong is the problem. Okay, let's look at another situation. A hallway, basic hallway. All right, when are the lights on? When the office is open. Here's a good one. What happens at night? Well, why do we care what happens at night in a hallway in an office? What happens at night in offices? Cleaning. That's right. Very important to remember that just because we happen to work in offices during the day doesn't mean that other people don't. What else happens at night in offices? Security. right? So those are two different functions that operate on two different schedules from the schedule that happens for most of the day. So we somehow need to accommodate that. The lights come back on for security sweeps and maintenance. All right, well, we're gonna figure this out. All right, so here again, what does our owner say? Duh. Simple, local control to meet code. That's really, I mean, 9 times out of 10, that's what you get. Okay, in our intent statement, hallways are lit during occupied hours. Lights come back on for security sweeps and maintenance. See, my mother can understand this, right? My mother, who, again, she's a college professor, she's not dumb, but if I said to her, yeah, Mom, one of the things I do is design really sophisticated lighting control systems. In fact, she just said to me today, I talked to her today, she's like, I need somebody, my apartment is dark. I need you. It's great to be needed by your mom, even if she's 83, but that's what my mom understands that I do, that I can fix the fact that her apartment is dark. All right, here's our sequence of operation statements. Luminaires located in hallways and general circulation areas shall respond to time clock cues, energizing automatically at the start of the workday and reducing to a lower nighttime level during evening hours. That's a lot more words, but it's also a lot more specific, right? And then I've also gone through and defined occupancy. What happens during the occupancy? During evening security rounds, luminaires in the hallway shall energize with the operation of a key switch or occupancy sensor. So this is a slightly older, when I wrote this particular verbiage, I was working on a project where there were still key switches, and they still thought that the security guard was gonna go in and stick that little 2-pronged thing in, and yeah, okay. Nobody in the front has any idea what that is, but everybody in the back does. All right. So they're not the same. They are both written documents, but they are not the same. Control intent narrative, descriptive language like higher and lower, and broad overviews. Things should dim. Sequence of operations, very specific. Set points. Just because you don't know what the set points are going to ultimately be exactly doesn't mean you shouldn't give somebody an idea, because they can do pre-programming. If they know, for example, that you think you're going to want to be at 30% of full, they can provide you with a system that starts out at 30% of full, and then you know if that's enough or not. You're not stuck there going, I don't know, is it too dark? Is it not dark enough? You've already run your calculations. You've gone through the whole thing with AGI. You know how much light you're going to get when the light is fully on. You also know how much light probably you need when the light isn't fully on. So you can go ahead and give them a little bit of an example. Just make sure that you allow for the adjustability in case, oh, I don't know, what if the ceiling is black? How many times have we started a project with white walls or light-colored walls, a white ceiling, and a light-colored floor, only to end up with mirrored walls, black ceiling, and okay, that's a disco, but still, right? It does happen, and people forget. Somebody actually was giving a talk at the show called 10 Things You Should Tell Your Lighting Designer, or Should You Tell Your Lighting Designer? I've changed my ceiling to black. Should I tell the lighting designer? Yeah, maybe. I've decided to cover my walls in navy suede. Should I tell the lighting designer? Perhaps. Okay, contractually enforceable language in this context means shall, not should, would, or will. The only verb, it's not even a verb, is it? I guess it is a verb. The verb that is acceptable in contract language is shall. I don't know why that is considered the only specific one, but trust me when I tell you, you want to use the word shall. It will make proofreading this document very, very complicated because it will sound weird. Just trust me, use the word shall. Okay, a couple more details. The control intent narrative is designed to give a general description of project goals and basic control strategies that are going to satisfy those goals. It's going to give you a description of the control system, like this system is going to use DALI, or this system is going to not use DALI, this system is going to be fully wired or fully wireless. It's not actually designed to tell you everything you need to know about the system in order to build it. It's designed to tell you everything you need to know about the system in order to lay it out and to begin to figure out how to specify it. and it should give preliminary descriptions of what I like to call lighting control events, which are things like the lights turn on and the lights turn off. In contrast, the sequence of operation is going to give you very, very specific steps. Functional programming requirements, equipment requirements, set points, levels, timing, the whole thing. So why is it important? On the left-hand side, now I did not write this diagram, this verbiage is from a book that we're going to talk about in a minute. But it's important, but first of all, it's good to see stuff that I didn't write, because I mean, I'm not that interesting. And second of all, it is a good way to sort of compare and contrast. So here we have on the right-hand side, the control intent narrative. We're talking about a wall switch. We're saying which energy code we're complying to. We're saying the light's going to come on, how it's going to go off, daylight responsive controls, emergency lighting. Now, I don't like to describe emergency lighting in my control intent because I don't think emergency lighting is a control issue. I like to simply say emergency lighting is being done by the electrical engineer, which I'm not. Look for it there. But different people go different ways. Sequence of operation. You can see here it actually tells us the size of the zone. It gives us all kinds of information, including in unison with the dimmer switch. Why is that important? Some systems have a lag, and in this particular case, a lag is not acceptable. So if you're putting together a system and there's going to be a lag, you want to make sure that if that's not acceptable, you want to make sure that you've sort of stated that up front. All right, so here, automatically turn off all lighting when unoccupied. Here, 20 minutes, right? So not just automatically, but 20 minutes. Here, daylight responsive zones automatically and continuously dim lighting in the window daylight zone. I actually like this thing, automatically and continuously, because that actually implies that as the level moves through the day, so does your light level. Here, 30-foot candles, it says shall automatically dim before, let me go back so you can see what it said before. Shall continuously dim based on daylight contribution to maintain at least 30-foot candles, right? So you're telling it to, that's right there tells you you've got a closed loop system, which means that there are some systems that won't fly, won't meet this specification. Okay, the good news is you don't have to remember this, there's a book. It's published by the Illuminating Engineering Society, the IAS, and it's called LP16, or Lighting Practice 16. It's an ANSI national standard. Why is that important? It's important because it means that, among other things, it was built by a consensus-based committee. It took us a very long time. We all met every other week and spoke ad nauseum about this stuff. I put the website up there in case anyone wants to know what it takes to be on an ANSI committee or how those committees are formed, because it is kind of an interesting process. It requires public review, acknowledged subject matter experts, and a balanced committee. The balanced committee part is really interesting because it means that unlike a lot of laws, an ANSI standard is not written by lobbyists. It's not just written by control manufacturers, it's written by control manufacturers in cooperation with specifiers and users and lighting fixture manufacturers whose stuff is being controlled by the control manufacturer. So everybody gets a chance, everyone has a seat at the table, everyone has a chance to comment, okay? This is actually an excerpt from the introduction to the book, and it sort of explains why we wrote the book. We wrote the book so that you will know how to create these documents so that they're clear and detailed to give you enough to give you what you want, and also so that they're contractually enforceable if you need to on the back end. This is what the book looks like. It's available from the IAS. It's a great book. All right. I have to say I get a little bit of a thrill every time I look at it and see an American national standard. That's like a really cool thing. So I want to stop here for a minute and say that if you are a member of the IAS, if you're not a member of the IAS, you should be. And if you are a member of the IAS and you have not yet served time on a technical committee, you should. It is probably the single greatest thing you can do for your career at whatever level you're at. That is, I mean, it's the lowest bar. It costs nothing except time. And you have the opportunity to interact with, first of all, truly brilliant people. Like, I don't make up the engineering that makes these control systems. I just talk about how I want it to behave so that it makes my design sort of come alive and work. But I am on a committee now with people who actually understand the electronics behind making this work. I'm on a committee now with people who are literally geniuses in how to control lighting that I don't even understand really how it works. I mean, I understand basically how a semiconductor works. That is to say, I know that it has something to do with bits and pieces of electricity jumping back and forth between different states. That's the extent of my understanding of a semiconductor. The people on this committee, there are people who actually could explain it. So first of all, you get to meet really brilliant people. Second of all, you're working on a national committee, so you're talking to people all over the country, and you're talking to people who are interested in the stuff that you're interested in from all different aspects. There is nothing bad about this. Whatever point in your career you're at, if you're an emerging professional, if you're a seasoned professional, it's a good thing to do, and it's a communal responsibility. So there, thus ends my commercial for technical committee membership. So here's what's in the book. Description of roles and responsibilities. If you're a lighting designer, what are you responsible for? If you're an electrical engineer, what are you responsible for? If you're the owner, what are you responsible for? Sorry, excuse me for a sec. Checklists and step-by-step instructions for putting this whole thing together. That, in and of itself, is a really good thing. Side-by-side examples like we just looked at, this is the control intent, this is the sequence, so that you can understand the difference between the two. Sample text. I find that a blank screen when I sit down to write a spec is the worst thing. So this is not designed to be cut and pasted. I guess that's the way to put it in past tense. But the goal is it gives you enough of a start so that you're not staring at a blank screen. You at least have some place to start. It's something you can think about. Timelines. How detailed do I need to be in DD as opposed to CD, right? Can I wait till CA to define my control system? Probably not. But this will actually tell you a little bit more, in more detail. And it will actually tell you why you don't want to wait till CA to design your control system. It will, in fact, tell you that a good time, the best time to start thinking about control is in schematic, which is way earlier than most people, I promise you. Okay, documentation examples. It'll actually show you there are matrices. You can put all of this information in a matrix. If you don't like to write in paragraphs, I happen to like in paragraphs. As you can see, I speak in paragraphs. So I like that way. Other people don't. And my control intent narrative runs to 20 pages. Yeah, it's a lot. So there are other ways to do it. I'm not up here to tell you that my way is the only way. You can do it in a chart. You can do it in a bulleted list. The document actually shows you 4 or 5 different ways to document this stuff so that you can find a method that works for you in your design process. Also, questionnaires for client research. Remember I told you the OPR was really important? How do you get that information? There are questionnaires here that you can use, you can freely copy, and it will get you at least you will have the ability to ask questions that might get you answers, which is never a bad thing. Sesame Street says the best way to get information is to ask questions. It's one of my favorite Sesame Street-isms. This gives you the questions. And that, my goodness, that was fast. That's all I got for you guys. Questions? You're all like deers in the headlight. Yes? OPR, Owner's Project Requirements. Anybody else? That's it, really? I've been talking for an hour and 13 minutes and you have nothing else to say to me? Yes?
Who do you get most of your questions from in the process?
In the process, I get a fair amount of questions from the vendor because usually it's like, Shauna, what the hell are you trying to do here? And I get, what I don't get, and I wish I did, were more questions from either the architect's team or the owner's team in terms of why are you doing this? Although really good electrical engineers will ask. That's actually one of the ways that I know I'm working with a really excellent electrical engineer. They've read my stuff and they say, I have some questions. So, other questions?
The contractors are mostly calling
The contractors, I mean, look, a good contractor, I think that a good professional will ask a question. I'm one of those people that honestly believes that the way that you can, one of the best ways to prove that you belong in the room is to ask a question. So I'm a big fan of asking questions, and actually I'm gonna address you people right here. Never be afraid to ask a question. And the reason that I'm saying this is because it happens a lot. You're in a meeting, you're the only woman in the meeting, you're the only person under 30 in the meeting, you're the only person who looks like you in the meeting. Whatever it is, you're the only you in the meeting. And it's really intimidating because everybody else looks like your dad or your Uncle Joe or your math teacher that you hated or whatever it is. And so you're already like in this little make myself small zone. Ask the question. I promise you, nobody in that meeting is looking to make you feel small. And the way that you will be able to fill up your own space and breathe your own breath is by asking the question and owning the fact that you're not pretending to know everything. And if you're not comfortable asking the question out loud, find somebody who somehow looks friendly for whatever reason and ask them afterwards, and then they will be your friend, and they will protect you through this process as you go. That's my charge. There was a question back there, yeah?
Yeah, you mentioned joining IES technical committees.
Yes.
How do you do that?
Go on the website. First of all, become an IES member. Go on the website. There's a tab that says committees, and it will list all of the technical committees that the IES has, and then there's a link that says join committee. You apply through the chair of the committee, and that's pretty much it. Anybody else? Yeah.
Given that you want questions, do you ever phrase things in your documents to encourage questions?
So I actually recently just issued a design intent narrative that I thought was too early in the process. And so at the end of each section, I said, questions still outstanding at this stage. Which system is driving? Are the lights controlling the shades or shades controlling the lights? How are we handling this thing? What are we doing about that thing? And it's actually in part of the control intent narrative. I don't know how it's gonna work. We're gonna see. I often ask questions. I mean, I'm really pretty adept at writing long, voluminous emails with lots of question marks. I don't often get answers because nobody has time to read them. So, anybody else? Thank you, guys.